Howdy, y'all. I'm Casey Kasem. This is my podcast, Get Real, with Casey Kasem, the podcast that goes behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry. On this week's episode, I talked with Liz Loza, fantasy football analyst for Yahoo Fantasy. We talked about competitive figure skating, how she got interested in football, being on TV and behind the mic, hanging out with Super Bowl winners, and more. Follow Liz on Twitter and Instagram at LizLoza_FF. You can find me on Twitter at TheCaseyKasem. You can follow the pod on Twitter at GetReal_pod. You can find all my writing with the fantasy footballers at thefantasyfootballers.com. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP network. Also, the show has a Patreon, patreon.com/CaseyKasem, KACEYKASEM. If you want to be a part of the Stay Rad crew, donate a couple of bucks every month and help support the show. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and tell some friends. And now here's my chat with Liz Loza. Liz Loza, woman of the hour. Here we go. How are you doing, ma'am? Let everybody know just what's going on with you right now.
Did you just call me ma'am?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you call me ma'am? You can get cool out the front door with that ma'am.
Hey, man, it's in a cool way. There, I called you man. That's what I meant to say.
Hey, ma'am. How are you today, ma'am? Well, I'm about to be a lot worse because you just called me ma'am. We're like the same age, Casey, by the way.
I know. Hey, I call everybody ma'am. It's probably gets very confusing very quick.
That's okay. I am in a space of transition, it feels like, along with the rest of the world, as the pandemic starts to, come to what we imagine is an end. And so that's like opening up opportunities for travel, but then questions and reemerging. And also from a sports point of view, like, what are practices going to look like? And if practices go back to, quote, normal, then what kind of access will beat reporters have? And are players, I know obviously in Buffalo, like this was a controversy, is there a need to show proof of vaccination? What kind of I mean, there's a whole new world we're living in. And so I am riding the wave of that transition like everybody else.
Well, let's talk about the start of your whole love for sports. When did you, since we're talking about transitions and everything, let's start at the beginning. And when did you start showing an interest in sports?
I don't think I ever didn't show an interest in sports. I think I remember some of my earliest memories are watching sports with my grandfather. I think a lot of people know by now, my mom was a single mom. So while she was off, putting food on the table and making sure there was electricity in our home working, my grandfather, we were also, I should say, lucky enough to have like my grandma and grandpa nearby so that they could help with childcare, which is something a lot of people obviously don't have these days. Mm-hmm. But my grandfather was, at least from like a domestic point of view, my primary caregiver. And this was a man who had numerous gold stars in World War II, was from not the nicest, shall we say, upscale neighborhood in the city of Chicago. I like to say he was a lot like a Carl Sandburg poem, also named Chicago, stormy, husky, brawly. He worked on the railroad. And he loved sports, and he was every bit of a World War II self-made. I mean, he worked as a locomotive mechanic. And so he was a diehard Chicago sports fan, and I was with him all the time. And so I learned how to do things like change the oil in a car before computers did it, and how to diagnose a faulty belt in the washing machine, and those kind of things. And so I learned how at a very young age, by the way, to make one hell of a martini. He showed me that. He watched the Cubs on WGN every day when I came home from school. He was sitting there drinking his gin martini and feeding our dog cheese crackers from Aldi's. Shout out to the Midwest if anyone knows what an Aldi's is. And so I'm an only child, and so I did everything with him, which happened to be a lot of watching sports. And I honestly didn't know it was a big deal for girls to know a lot about sports, because that was the normal that I was raised in.
Right. And can you imagine how your life would be if you didn't have sports in it? Or is that just like too crazy to even think about?
I mean, I think that I can't imagine there not being sports in my life because it's such a foundation to who I am. And because I think that sports beyond beyond the parameters of a field or a baseball diamond or a basketball court, like is such an interesting ground for storytelling. And people like to like use the stick to sports hashtag, but we can't, because like literally sports has always been, not just becoming, it has always been a mirror for what is going on a social and political level. And I think that the thing that is so awesome about sports is that there is almost always a clear winner, right? Like at the buzzer, the team with the most points wins and beats the team who doesn't have as many points. And so there is a winner. And yet within that back and forth, there are all of these shades of gray that reflect our society. And it is one of the few places where we can have a definitive yes or no, black or white, winner or loser answer, but still have all of the different levels of, perspective and enjoyment and storytelling.
Yes. And when you were a kid, did you play sports as well, or did you just watch them?
Yeah. No, I definitely played sports. So I am the shortest volleyball player ever. You've met me in person. I'm not a big person. I did play volleyball. My career was short-lived because I'm short. But I was not I'm 5'2". I was not a particularly good setter. And usually the shorter girls on the squad have to set. But I had one hell of a serve. Like that was can you hear that airplane? Should I edit this out? I don't know. There's a helicopter. I had one heck of a serve. Like I was a back row bumper with this killer lollipop serve that would like keep people guessing. So I did play volleyball, and my primary sport though was figure skating. I was really pigeon-toed, very, very attractive as a child. Let me tell you, I was.
Weren't we all?
I might be the definition of a late bloomer, but I was a very awkward kid and very pigeon-toed. And my mom took me to the podiatrist, and the podiatrist was like, well, you could pay for orthotics, which was really expensive up front. Like I said, my mom was a single mom, or you could put her in like ballet and figure skating, and like those will force a turnout. So my mom, like, probably it would have been cheaper in the long run to just pay for the orthotics. But she was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then I was actually really good at figure skating, and I really loved it. And I loved like whipping around the ice and jumping. I wasn't as good at the spins. And so I was a competitive figure skater until I blew out my ankle at 16.
Being a kid who did something like that, because that's kind of out of the norm for a lot of us to for most of us that are listening to this. I don't think most of the people, I've seen the grouping of people that listen to this podcast, I don't think they're out figure skating. But how is that for a child? Like, how is the routine? Because I know like going to soccer practice or t-ball or whatever is one way. How is that different or the same?
Well, anyone who skates, whether you're figure skating or playing hockey, because we shared ice time with the hockey players. So that's why hockey, I actually, in terms of my career, I got the job at Yahoo partially because they needed someone to do DFS hockey. And I was like one of the few people who could do football and hockey. And I only learned hockey because I was at the ice rink growing up all the time. So we were sharing time with ice with the hockey players. But you do a lot of early mornings. It's like swimmers. So it's like 5 o'clock in the morning wake ups. I would do patch, which was figure eights, and then freestyle. And I had a coach and the whole thing. And you had to be super disciplined to get up. I'm not a morning person either. You had to be super disciplined to get up in the morning and work out, and also train on the ice, but then work out off of the ice to, stay strong, etc. And then after school, my grandpa would take me back to the rink for group lessons and for another private, and spent a lot of time on the ice. But I do think the thing that it did taught me was discipline. I think I'm one of the most disciplined people I know, unfortunately. But I wish I could sometimes be less disciplined, because you see people who are not particularly disciplined still succeeding. But like I think that's some old skating like programming where I have to land the jump. I have to get the article just right. I have to get the take just right. Like all of that is still in me. So I think that was really, and I liked it. Like I competed. So I had that competitive streak in me, and and I'd say the tough thing about figure skating too was that it's still a subjective sport. So the judges would score you, but like it is also one of the most politically, it's a super political sport. And like kids with wealth have fancier costumes, and those costumes tend to get graded higher, even though they shouldn't matter. And like I was definitely wearing hand-me-downs, and I learned, again, sports is a reflection of our societal and political state of being, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. And I learned that a lot. Figure skating, I think the like best thing I learned from figure skating was staying disciplined. And also one of the most cutting things I learned was that the hardest working person doesn't always win.
Ding, ding. That's a great piece of advice. And I know a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are just getting started in the fantasy football industry, are looking, for advice. And that's a really good one. I want to know, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a sitcom actor. I wanted to be like Jennifer Aniston is who I wanted to be when I grew up, or any of those sitcom stars I totally idolized growing up. But I definitely wanted to be like, I didn't want to be a movie star. I didn't want to be on soap operas. I wanted to be a sitcom star. I wanted to make other people laugh. I wanted to be relatable, and I wanted to tell stories.
And so when you were done with high school, what did you go on to do right after that?
I went to college, and I was definitely a little lost going into college because I went to college on the East Coast. I'm from, like I said, Chicago in the Midwest, and I was like the only person to leave the Midwest for college. But I still like want to see everything, I feel like you get one shot at this world, at this life, and I want to like burn as much of the candle as I can. I want to see as much of it as I can. I definitely suffer from some FOMO.
Yeah.
So I got accepted to a college out east, and I went, and definitely struggled. My grandpa passed away the first semester of me being there, having a very difficult time adjusting. And my mom called me, and I tried to I flew home, but I didn't make it home in time to say goodbye, which was completely gut-wrenching. Weirdly, it started my career in fantasy, if I'm like pinpointing it though, because I came home and as a way to grieve, just turned on the Bears game. The Bears were playing the Vikings. And then I started just watching every single football game, not just the NFC North. And I started learning all of the teams. And that kind of like gave me the foundation to move into fantasy like a decade or so, maybe less than a decade later. But eventually when I got to college, I double majored in theater and sociological linguistics because I loved language and the evolution of language and how cognitively we process different syntaxes, and I diagrammed a lot of syntax trees and phonetics and all of that stuff. Noam Chomsky, man, read Noam Chomsky. It'll blow your mind. I find all of that stuff fascinating. And I have a degree from Brown University in it for nothing. So there you go.
There you go. Hey, you know what? Wow. Okay. That's just, I was in college for like 9 years, and that's because I switched my major so many times. If I would have just double majored, right? No, just kidding. But college. Fun time. So you were talking about your grandfather being instrumental in you becoming in the fantasy football industry. How did you first come across fantasy football?
So I had graduated from college, and I was dating this guy. Kind of basic to say, but it's true. I was dating this guy, and I remember we were like getting kind of serious. I like dug him. I had a big crush on him. And it was like a weekend. We were like spending all this time together, right? Like that, in the beginning when you're just like, blah, 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 can't leave each other's side. And it was a Sunday, and he was a little bit older than me, and he definitely made more money because I was like a struggling actress who was like not making money, like making negative money. I was waiting tables and cocktail waitressing, and so I just had cash all the time. And he said, I have something called the Red Zone channel. Do you know what that is? And I was like, oh man, he's rich. And then he was like, I'm in this thing called the Fantasy Football League, and my friends and I, like, we watch this thing called the Red Zone channel on Sundays. We just kind of watch football on the sofa all day and like see how our teams are doing. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, what food are we ordering? Are we ordering pizza, wings, Chinese? What are we thinking? And he was like, oh my God, you'll do that with me? And I was like, yes.
Yes.
I will do it. Like, that's actually because as I was alluding to earlier, my grandpa passed and just started watching all of these football games. And that became, listen, I had a single mom and I was going to college. Ain't nobody had no money for therapy. So that was how I dealt with the grief and how I therapized myself. And so now I was like learning the league and not just learning the region in which I was a fan. And so I sat down with him and started watching football, and he realized when I was commenting on different teams and players that I knew what I was talking about, or that I had a knowledge base of the NFL and of the game. And he said, he started asking me questions. He was like, should I start? Maurice Jones-Drew? And I was like, well, you never don't start MJD. Like, yes, you should start MJD. And lo and behold, I co-managed that team to a Super Bowl victory. And I was hooked completely. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this thing called fantasy football. I had no idea it existed. I love that me and this dude that I'm dating can sit here and watch the Red Zone channel that he is paying for. This is the best thing ever. And I want in on the league. Like, why would I want to share my team? I would like to do what I want to do and not have to run it past anyone. I still like that, which is problematic when you have a job at a corporation. But so lo and behold, there was an opening in that league, and I took it, and I won the Super Bowl the next year. And all of the guys, because I was the only woman, balked about it being beginner's luck. And then I won the Super Bowl again. The second year it was mine. So 3 years in a row, I had a hand in winning a Super Bowl, 2 on my solo team. And then I remember I was like watching fantasy football live on Yahoo Sports, on Yahoo Fantasy, right? Like, I was watching it before kickoff. By the way, Fantasy Football Live airs 90 minutes before kickoff every Sunday because I've been on the show now for 6 years. But then I watched it, and I remember turning to this boyfriend and being like, why aren't there any like women on this show? Like, what this show's like, it's good, but it could be a lot better. And he was like, I don't know, like, why don't you start a blog? So I did. And that was it.
That was it. And so the blog came about. Had you ever done any like real writing before for any sort of publication or anything? Or was this like kind of a like first time thing? Let's try this out.
I wrote a grip of term papers about sociological linguistics.
So you got that. Yeah.
And I was on the high school newspaper. Well, but no, I had never written, I'd like written poems and like emo poems as an early 20s or teenager that got published in some like, little booklets and stuff. But no, I'd never like written professionally. But that was the beauty of blogging in the like, what one was this? Probably like the late aughts, like 2009-ish. Like this was,
yeah, because I had a blog, and that's when I graduated from college, and I remember blogging about that.
Yeah, I had a blog, and hold on, what are you doing? Oh, sorry, the boyfriend that I was talking about. He just walked
Hey,
because I married him, or
there
he
you
married
go.
me. So I was just like, why not? Like, this is free. And I was also at the same time, like working as an actress, but it was really frustrating because as an actress, you need all of these stars to align to do your work. Like you have to make sure the director likes you and the producer likes you, and you're too tall or you're not tall enough. I was never too tall, let's be honest. But like, your eyebrows could be too close together. You reminded a producer of an ex-girlfriend, and so you couldn't get the job. But all of these things had to come together in order for you to actually do the job that you wanted. But if I had my own blog, I could just do it. And I didn't get paid for it, but at least it was like some sort of creative outlet. So I just started writing. And then every year, every season, I was like, how else can I add to this? Like, what is the next iteration in my career? Kind of like the figure skating. Like, okay, now I can land a loop jump. Like, now I got to land an axle. Like, what's the next progressive step. And the second year, I remember, was like, okay, I have to get some podcasts. I hear these podcasts are becoming popular. Like, I don't know, like they may be onto something with this whole podcast thing. So I went into iTunes and I searched for fantasy football.
Yep.
And of course, ESPN and CBS came up. And then the third most listened to, most downloaded podcast was an independent podcast with two guys named Kevin and Lyle, and they had the Fantasy Football Guys podcast. And I sent everybody who wasn't CBS or ESPN, every single independent fantasy football podcast, a query letter saying, hey, here's a link to my blog. I've had it for a season. Here's some of my work. I really like sleepers. That's kind of the thing I'm most excited by. And I would love it if you gave me an opportunity to do a sleeper segment on your podcast. And the only people to respond were Kevin and Lyle. Everybody else like either didn't respond or said, nah, it's our show. Kevin and Lyle were like, sure. Like if you, and they were like the number one most downloaded independent podcast in the space at the time. And so they gave me a sleeper segment on their regular show. And it got me a larger, like all of a sudden my clicks on my blog were like going up, and it gave me incredible experience and reps at doing a new skill. I remember the first time I was on, like I was super, super nervous, which blew my mind because I was like, I've like been in a movie with Eddie Murphy and I'm not as and I'm much more nervous for this podcast appearance than I was like opposite Eddie Murphy, admittedly for like 5 lines, but still, you know? And so then the next year was like, okay, I want my own podcast. And then the next year after that, I was like, okay, now we have to add video, vlogs, blogs. And so I think that was like when I incorporated, I was like, okay, now I'm writing and I'm podcasting and I'm doing my own video. And I will tell you that I worked like nobody else during that video section. Like I taught myself how to read off of a teleprompter. I saved all of my money to buy an iPad because there was a teleprompting app on it. And then I found this guy in Texas who basically built like a wooden box with a reflective piece of glass on it that I could stand up. I had a friend who was like moving to Canada and had a bunch of like film gear, like cameras and tripods and stuff. And she gave me a busted tripod and I put like some books underneath it. And I had this box with reflective glass that cost me $200, including shipping. And I screwed it on and I like duct taped the whole thing together. And I saved all my money for an iPad with that teleprompter app so that I could like use that box as a teleprompter basically, and then wrote all of my copy and taught myself how to read off of a teleprompter, and then made that, had like 2 to 3 video pieces with like a logo and a theme and a branded segment to add to the blog. And I think that was when I started doing all 3 things, like checking all 3 boxes of written, audio, and video, that I started to like get some real attention.
Do you think that writing, since that's what you started off with, do you think that writing is still something that people should focus on when they're first trying to get in? Or do you think that now with all the technology and all the new stuff that's coming up that, you know, get in where you can?
I still feel like writing is the best. I mean, like I wrote all my copy for the video. I still write all of my copy. Let me be real. At Yahoo Sports, like ain't nobody writing for us.
Yeah.
Like we are still at this level. I don't know about other outlets, but I know that Yahoo Fantasy is the number 1 place for fantasy football. And I know that all of their talent, we're all still writing. I write articles numerous times a day. And I know that even when I'm on video, nobody's writing. I don't have a writer. I don't have a team. I don't have a research team. Like I am doing all of my own research. I am doing all of my own writing. So yeah, I think probably you should learn how to write, because I mean, I don't know where it's at other places, but like it's a good skill to have because you're going to need to do it for yourself.
Yeah, that great advice as well. With putting together a website, putting together a blog, and doing all of that stuff, like how did you figure out how to do that in the first place? Where did you go to? Like, because you were in this world that was like kind of new, you know? Well,
I mean, I had a WordPress blog, so it wasn't like everyone had like what, Blogspot or WordPress, right?
Like, or WordPress. Yeah.
Like,
and see, so that's all you like really needed was just like find the tool that helps you the best and use it.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, definitely watched some like tutorials, and a lot of it is just trial and error. Like there's not a lot of it is like you just have to do it and make mistakes. You have to, like, again, like you're gonna fall a bunch of times before you land an axle, and it's gonna hurt, but then eventually you'll land the axle. But it takes trying, you know. So a lot of it was, you know, like writing the query letters to all these fantasy football people, being like, hey, and I mean, I wrote a personalized query letter to every single one, and you got to throw a bunch of spaghetti on the wall to see if it's gonna stick. That said, if anybody's listening knows graphics and stuff, like I'm looking to overhaul my entire personal website, like top to bottom, and I don't know how to do it. So and I don't have the time to keep trying. So if somebody wants to like do it for me, hit me up at LizLoza_FS.
Yeah. Somebody will hit you. Yeah, I don't know anything about any of that kind of stuff. Like, no. And I do remember back in the day, like having like a blogger account or something. I don't know. That's what I was using back in the day. It was like, yeah, it's just crazy to see where we've come now versus where, you know, when you were getting started, even, and then people that I've had on that like didn't even have the internet when they first started out. It's just crazy to see, you know, to see that kind of stuff and how it progresses. So doing your own, having your own kind of brand, the Fantasy Football Girl, how important is it to like have your own brand and have something that people can recognize you like immediately from?
I mean, I think I am torn. It is important. I'm torn in answering this question because I think a lot of people start with building a brand instead of building a body of work. And so if the work is good, then what I mean, like,
I do know what you
also,
mean.
I knew very early on that I wanted to do sleepers. That was the thing that I pitched in 2010. I was like, oh, this makes me the most excited. Like, I like this, you know? And so when I interviewed at Yahoo, they were like, how do you see yourself fitting in? And I was like, well, I'm going to do the sleepers articles. And no one really was doing in our group at the time. No one was really like focusing on that. And I still have my own sponsored sleepers article now, weekly. So I think it's kind of like there are people who like really love running backs, and there are people who like really love graphs, and there are people who are like really into analytics, and there are people who are, especially right now, like really into incorporating Vegas odds into their work. And so I think that's one piece of it. And then, you know, what is your essence? What, you know, if you talk to a bunch of people who are not your mom or your best friend, and you ask them to give you 3 adjectives, this is a great exercise, actually. Go to a friend, like a medium friend, you know, not somebody who's like your mom, and say to them, what are 3 adjectives that immediately come to mind when you think about me? Well, then use those to help kind of mold the essence of your brand. Like if you get witty, sharp, edgy, then there's, you know, if that you can move in that direction, you can start to chisel away at how you are perceived. And I think knowing, not just because like, okay, this is random, but like over the weekend, I shouldn't admit this. Over the weekend, my girlfriend took me to, my girlfriend's like a little bit, she's super woo-woo. I'm not going to even downplay it. So she took me to see this astrologer. And like, I will admit that I'm into the horoscopes and whatever. And he said, he called me intense, and I was pissed. And I was like, I don't think I'm intense. And he was like, you don't?
No, I'm just kidding.
And I was like, no, I don't think I'm intense. But in relating to, like, it's important to know that other people think you're intense, because you may not be trying to project a certain feeling or ethos, but other people may be picking up something you don't even know you land out. And so I think that that's really important when you are constructing your brand. But most important is having a foundation on which to build a brand.
So you had your foundation and you started out, you know, on your own, then branched out. How did that process go from being on your own to actually, you know, having, you know, someone that you worked for?
Well, let's see. In 2009, I launched the Fantasy Football Girl, and it was definitely like a side project because I was still like working as an actress. Like I wasn't, you know, fully dedicating all of my time and energy to it. And then in 2010, I did the Fantasy Football Guys. X's and Y's came in 2011. In 2012, was the vlogs, and then in 2013. So I in 2013, I got pregnant, I
Mhm.
think. Yeah, I had my son. I had my son in 2013, in the summer of 2013. And that was nuts. And that was also, though, when I decided like acting it was too hard to be like a mom and run to auditions and have a baby. And I don't have my husband and I are out in Los Angeles by ourselves. We don't have like family to help. We definitely didn't have the money for like a nanny or anything like that at the time. And I then put I remember, here's like the story. I don't know if this is interesting to anyone, but you can edit if it's not. My son was 6 months old, and I had booked 2 episodes of a show called The Last Ship, which was starring the guy who played McSteamy from
Eric Dane.
Grey's Anatomy. Yes.
Okay.
So I had his next series was called The Last Ship, and I booked 2 episodes of that show. My son was 6 months old, and it was a nightmare because the crew ran over. I was nursing. I'm like pumping in a trailer. They're telling me to go back. We ran over. I did not walk in the door. I left the house at 3 p.m. to work. I was supposed to be wrapped. I didn't get home till 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember I walked in and I like quietly set everything down, my breast pump and all of the things, like was just trying to like get to bed. And like a half an hour after I walked in the door and it finally washed up, put all of the like breast pump stuff, washed it, put it all away, he started screaming because he was awake, because he was 6 months old and they wake up in the middle of the night. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't do this. Like this is, and I was so like the thing that should have been thrilled because I was doing this like guest star opposite this awesome actor who was very kind, by the way. Like they didn't do anything wrong. It was just like the nature of the beast, right? Yep. And I didn't want to I was like, I don't want this job anymore. I love this other, like, this is not compatible. And I think that's probably a larger conversation for people more important than me, but like making industries like available and comfortable to working mothers is something that maybe our society needs to work on, or at least in Western society, we need to work on. But that was the moment that I was like, I have to focus fully on fantasy football. I want a career. And that was the moment that I was like, this is it. So I started like really, really focusing, started doing off-season work on the blog, which I hadn't really done, but I had the opportunity now to like write free agency articles and get into dynasty stuff and the rookies and everything that keeps the football season afloat during the off-season, or keeps fantasy afloat during the off-season. I started like digging into that more. And then a company called Scout reached out to me. Actually, I was on, Nando DeFino had me on his Sirius XM show, and the wonderful Dr. Roto, Mark Bloom, heard me on Nando's show. And this is why you say yes to everything, because you never know who's going to listen or when the stars are going to align. He sends me a DM and he was like, oh my gosh, like I just heard you were fantastic on Nando's show. Like I'm working at this new place called Scout. We are hiring. I loved your analysis. Like, how come I don't know about you? And I was like, well, I don't know why you don't know about me. That's on you.
Hey.
And so he introduced me to his boss, and I went through an interview process, and they hired me at Scout, and it was my first full-time fantasy gig. And I worked tirelessly and wrote and did videos and podcasts and worked and worked and worked. And I had like a 13-month-old baby. And I don't know. I don't think I slept.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much sleep you actually got.
I did not sleep. And I will tell you quite honestly that my husband and I had never fought more, because like all I did was take care of the baby and sleep, take care of the baby and sleep, like take care of the baby and work, take care of the baby and work and not sleep. And then Yahoo after that season. So that was the 2014 season. In 2015, Yahoo reached out. They were hiring another head and asked if I would interview and sit down with them. And then I was hired in July of 2015 at Yahoo Fantasy.
That's a super awesome progression. And going back to the acting thing real quick, I just want to know, do people tweet at you all the time when they see you on, they're watching
Criminal
a show?
Minds?
Yeah, Criminal Minds. Like my wife's mom was like, yo, well, she doesn't say yo, but if she did, she was like, yeah, let's watch Criminal Minds while I'm visiting. And then there's Liz Loza. And I was like, I knew you were in it, but I had never seen it before. So, I was like, hey, I know her.
It depends on the show. Like Criminal Minds runs and runs. And Criminal Minds, by the way, is a perfect pandemic show.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people burn through those episodes. So yeah, or I did an episode of Monk. Sometimes Scandal, if they're reshowing Scandal. I did 2 episodes of Scandal. 24 was another one. So yeah, sometimes people will tweet at me, but it feels like a lifetime ago, like a different version of myself.
I mean, we all have that going on. We weren't on TV to see it all happen, so right. Nobody's going to be like, I saw you on TV, but yeah, there's Liz Loza. So the transitioning to full-time in the fantasy football industry, what were your expectations going into it? Because you were doing, it part-time, then to go full-time. What were you going into it like?
Well, honestly, I mean, I worked so long at Scout, like hours. I was like tasked with writing an article a day. I mean, there was a content calendar and I had to like churn it out. So I didn't really have any expectations. I mean, I will say that I was very lucky to be buoyed by people who were supportive and smart and encouraging. And if I ever had a question, I mean, I'd say the hardest transition for me was these things we do, these fearless forecasts, where we have to write. It's still the most challenging thing I do because the amount of time it takes is rough, but we have to write there's quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and like a number of them. Like I think it's 20 quarterbacks, like 30 or 35 running backs and wide receivers, and then like 12 tight ends. And every week we have to, depending on the matchup, write a blurb that we have to write it, and then we have to say it on video. So again, nobody's writing for you. And you have to give some stats so you don't sound like an idiot. And then a fearless forecast, which is a projection for that week. That was the biggest, like, oh my God, I gotta write 35. And the turnover, by the way, we film those on Tuesday morning and the games end on Sunday. So you spend all day Monday churning out those fearless forecasts. And I had never done anything like that. It was really because you learn, I kept wanting to be right. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the new person. I'm the only woman. I have to, like, the bar is so high. And if I mess up, I feel like I'm letting everybody, like people I don't even know, down, And I was so intent on getting it right. And Brad Evans gave me some great advice. He was like, you're going to be wrong. Yeah. You're going to be wrong. So just say the thing. Just say the thing. Give a couple of stats, say the thing. It is still something I have to admit I struggle with because we're talking about skating. I want to land it perfectly. I want a 10 every time. And knowing that sometimes you just have to let it rip and know that, like, you're going to be wrong about Evan Ingram. You're going to be wrong about whoever it is, right?
Yep.
And live with that is kind of that's the deal that you're making.
So when you give out advice or when people ask you questions on Twitter or whatever,
bad advice.
No.
Fully well-informed advice.
But I would say that Liz is a very informative follow on Twitter. And yes, but I'm sure you're like every woman in this industry, every person in this industry, but especially women in this industry, where you get every now and then a jackwagon that comes and tweets at you, right? So how do you deal with like brushing your shoulders off and dealing with that kind of?
So I think I decided a long time ago that, I'm still standing, right? So like, I think I get it less than the newer women who have come into this space because I have proven myself and I've had enough people say, thank you for helping me win a championship. The fact that I had to prove myself, though, was a little bit messed up at the same level. But, I have come to the place where I have decided that I choose who gets my energy. I am in charge of me. I am in charge of my energy. And I don't sprinkle me around freely because I'm too expensive for that. So if somebody is coming after me, I have to make the choice whether or not I am going to allow them to affect me. And that is the only way that I have been able to like deal with it. I'm not saying that I, like, oh, I just brush my shoulders off and I'm like a duck and everything goes by. Like there have definitely been moments where I've been like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just have to like take a breath and be like, all right, well, they only win if you let them stick with you. So my general like rule of thumb is to just not engage. The only time I really want to engage is when I get a well actually. Because like the blatant trolls aren't worth your energy. You're never going to turn them. You're never going to change them.
Nope.
That is just wasted. Listen, I'm a full-time working mom with a big job and a lot of stuff to do. And I'm not giving some keyboard warrior living in his parents' basement any of my good juju, right?
Right on.
So that's all conserved for the people I care about and for myself. But I will say the times I do get sucked in, and maybe I shouldn't admit this because now it's going to show up in my timeline, but is the like, well, actuallys. Perfect example on draft day, NFL draft day. I referenced the leak about San Francisco making a proposal to the Green Bay Packers in exchange for Aaron Rodgers. I typed offer as part of what we were engaging about and discussing. I said, I was like the 49ers offer for Aaron Rodgers. And somebody tweeted back with, well, I thought there was no official offer. And I was like, really? Mm-hmm. This is where you gotta, well, actually, me. I was like, oh, excuse me, proposal. Obvious. Like that is where I will.
Come on, y'all.
Like you wanted to be heard so badly that you had to correct that piece of it. We all know.
Yeah.
What, like that is, I think, where I need to do better. Like I need to not let that get under my skin, but it is that like need to be like, actually.
Yeah.
That drives me crazy.
And then throw a little ma'am in there at the end. Ma'am. Oh, well, girl. Actually, ma'am. That's how you can really get under your skin. Hey. Anyway. Okay, I want to go back and talk about X's and Y's because that is a podcast that I know was one of the first podcasts that I was like really interested in when I started subscribing to podcasts. What was the whole process with that, and why did you decide that was something to do, and how awesome is John?
John is amazing. He's mad at me right now because we're recording a reunion episode. I got my dates crossed and like didn't show up 2 weeks ago when I was supposed to. So it's a little bit. So we're rescheduling, but the reunion episode is coming. And I am looking forward to it. John is an incredible person. I introduced him to his wife, by the way. She was my esthetician. So I think I've made up for it. But basically, it's a cool story. So I was on an airplane flying on American Airlines to go visit my grandma in Texas, in McAllen, Texas.
Alrighty.
At the time, my grandma was still alive and with us. I was flying down there, and the American Ways magazine that's in the seat pocket in front of you. I didn't buy my Us Weekly that day, and I was rushing, so I just was reading the American Ways magazine, and there was an article called Queens of Sunday. And it was written by a woman named Amy Sorley, and it was all about how the NFL's female fan base was booming and growing, and how it had reached about 40% at that point. 40% female, 60% male. And she wrote it wonderfully. And I tore, you're not supposed to do this, but I tore the article out of the magazine and pocketed it and said, I bet this will be good for my blog at some point. So sure enough, something happened. I think the Ben Roethlisberger scandal happened, and I felt the need to write about it on my blog. And I referenced this woman's article that I had read months prior. And then I decided, because Google exists, and it did then too, I decided to Google her, and she happened to live in Los Angeles. So long story short, I reached out to her and I was like, hey, here's a link to an article I wrote. I referenced the article that you wrote in it. Do you want to get drinks? Should we be friends? And so we went out for drinks and watched the Lakers game. The Lakers were playing, and so were it was Stanley Cup time. So the Blackhawks were in the Stanley Cup and the Lakers were in the playoffs, and she was a diehard Lakers fan. And I was obviously watching the Blackhawks, And we sat at a bar talking sports, hockey and basketball. My accent just came out real bad there. Hockey and basketball. And then totally clicked and became friends, and then started watching. Then when football season rolled around, she and I would like go to the bars together and watch the games. She introduced me to this guy, John. John and I ordered these chilaquiles, and they were disgusting. And they were making fun of me for not eating these chilaquiles, because I was like, oh my God, this is gross. So John's like giving me heck, and we're fighting about Green Bay and the backfield in Green Bay. My God, things don't change. Nope. Anyway, we were like fighting about the backfield in Green Bay. And Amy turns to us and she was like, you guys have great chemistry. You should do a podcast together. And I was like, well, you know what? Like, actually, that's kind of next on my list. I kind of wanted to do my own podcast. And so John was like, I'd love to do a podcast. And so we did.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But again, it's just like, that's like, it's using the moments that come to you. Mm-hmm. Like, if I had not been down to visit my grandma in Texas, if I had not ripped out that article, and then this is the important part, if I had not reached out to her and been like, hey, I liked your work. At the time, I was thanking her. Like, I was like, I like your work. I used it. Let's grab drinks. She said yes. We became friends. She introduced me to John. I mean, like, it's that, like, you have to be willing to make connections. You have to network. You have to, like, be a fan of somebody. You know, I was her fan, and you have to tell somebody that you appreciate what they're doing. It's not like, what can this person do for me? I was the one who was like, thank you for writing this article. I wasn't out there looking for someone, like auditioning podcast co-hosts. It was a completely organic thing. And I think that's why it was a pretty successful show until we just didn't have the bandwidth to do it anymore. Our downloads were really, really good for an independent podcast.
How do you spread the word on an independent podcast to get more people interested in it? Or
well, now, I mean, the space is so saturated.
It is so saturated, right? Yeah, it is saturated. And at the same time, like, there's so many more channels on YouTube and everything else. Podcasting, you know, they tell you this to try to make you feel good about it when you start a podcast. It's, oh, you know, there's how many aren't active, right? How many podcasts aren't active anymore? And you have to take that out of the equation and so on and so forth, whatever. But it's really cool that people were able to see you guys and to gel like that and to click like that, because I was going to ask you about how that came about. And I'm glad that you said it, because I tried to do the co-host thing and it just didn't work out for me. So, you know, it happens.
Well, sometimes you just like John and I just liked each other, and we didn't like each other, you know, like we liked each other like friends.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that chemistry is one of those, whether it was in my acting world or in fantasy, like, you just have chemistry with some people. You're just not everybody can be your person. And I think that's really good too, when you're talking about like the comments or the trolls. Like, not everybody is going to be your person, and you're not going to be everybody's person. And that's fine. That's just kind of a rule of the universe, you know?
And networking, because networking, we talk about it every single episode, but it's so important. And some people ask me, they're like, I want to network. I want to reach out to people, but I don't want to come off as rude or anything like that. Like, what do you know, if somebody feels like there's somebody out there that's an inspiration to them and they want to like reach out, what's the right way to go about that? Do you have any
advice? I think networking is one of those things that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
Because I watch people, again, as an actor, I have plenty of friends who work in entertainment. Most of my friends work in entertainment, and they're all pretty successful. And I can watch someone try to network with them. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can feel, and this has happened to me, you can feel when you are being networked with. And it doesn't feel great, and it doesn't inspire or motivate anybody to help the person who's clearly, like, you can't walk into a situation and be like, oh, there's Brad Evans. Let's see what he can get me. Brad Evans is going to be motivated to get you nothing, because what's he going to get up? Like, you have to think about both sides. When you and I met, right? We met at, what was that thing called?
National Fantasy Football Convention in Dallas, Fort Worth, whatever. One of those places.
We met at the NFFC.
Yeah.
And you didn't come up to me and be like, hey, you're Liz Loza. You didn't. In fact, I came up to you and I was.
It's because I'm a bitch.
Well, but you weren't trying to like network me. We became friends because I saw you wearing a Scott Fishbowl t-shirt and I was like, oh, I'm in that too. And then you looked at me sideways and you're like, girl, why are you talking to me? And then
I've been drinking. It's okay.
But you know what I mean? Like at that kind of event,
yeah,
it's a networking event. But I think that I wouldn't worry so much about networking, and I would instead try to build authentic, organic relationships. Those take time, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's how you network successfully. Nobody's going to do nothing for you just because you want them to and you happen to be sharing some sort of real or virtual space. Developing a friendship, developing a relationship, acknowledging that you're not going to vibe with everybody is how real networking happens. Andy Behrens and I were friends on Twitter for years before I got hired at Yahoo. For years, I'm from Chicago, he's from Chicago, he lived in Chicago. Whenever I was home, he and I would like go grab a beer. We genuinely enjoyed each other. I genuinely look up to him. If I'm being 100% honest, receiving Andy Behrens' approval and praise is still one of the most important things to me because I care about his opinion. I think I respect him and I care. So therefore I care about what he thinks of my work. Whether or not that should be anymore, it's true. We were like friendly for years. We had met in person for years. So then when Yahoo was interested in me, guess who could say something nice about me? I didn't meet Andy Behrens being like, you should go tell your boss to hire me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's not going to get you anywhere. You were talking about Scott Fish. I had him on last week to talk, or 2 weeks ago, whatever. And he was bringing up that he texts with you like all the time, that you guys are in constant contact and that you guys came up around the same time and all that jazz. So for the newer people that are just now coming up and doing that, how important do you think it is to like have each other's backs, you know, look out for each other? Do you think that there's so many people now in the industry that it's hard to have everybody's back? I know that.
I mean, I just feel like if you're a good person, you can have somebody's back. Like I also don't need to engage in every single debate on fantasy Twitter.
Nah, don't need to
do you know what I mean?
No, I know what you mean.
So I do see a lot, like I have the sense and the feeling that a lot of these debates happen so that engagement can be created and follower counts can be increased. And I understand that there's like a hustle to that. But also if your work isn't great, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yes, exactly.
And I'm not saying the people who do that don't have great work. Like I'm not saying that, but I think that again, you got to start with the work. You have to like, here's another weird analogy. Like I have a friend who's a very successful stand-up comedian. And she said, I didn't invite, like I had a show, like my first live open mic at the Improv. I didn't invite anyone. I don't want to invite everyone to my like first go at something. I invited everyone when I like had worked out the kinks in my set and I knew I had a tight 10 and people were laughing. Then I invited people. Because then I want people to see, like, I think there's this like impulse, like I did something and I want to share it with the world, but maybe you like work on your craft before you go share it with the world so that it is not because like, and that's not to be a jerk, but so that your work can be as wonderfully received as it deserves to be, you know?
I do know. Yes. And the reps thing that you were talking about earlier, getting your reps in, you know, guesting on other podcasts and doing all that jazz is the same kind of thing. So what kind of advice do you have for people, especially because, you know, you come from the acting background and you were doing that. So you were more comfortable, I'm guessing, in front of the camera than some people.
Yeah.
But what kind of advice do you have for people that are starting out that are a little nervous about jumping into it?
Well, I don't. That's an interesting question. Maybe it's not for you. Is okay answer?
No, you're not the only person who said that. There's been other people on here that are like, there's other mediums for you to go down. Maybe.
Like I think that there's everybody is gonna have the thing that they. I think I am better on video than I am on the page. I'm good on the page. I've gotten nominated plenty of times on the page. But it's like, it comes more naturally to me on video than it
Mm-hmm.
does if I'm writing an article, right? Like writing an article takes time for me. I am not a fast writer.
Mm-hmm.
I am much better off the cuff, like talking. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I have to focus more of my efforts. That's where I made more of my reps. So I would say there are just like reps you can take, like film yourself. But also it doesn't, the end product doesn't always have to be on camera. Like I feel like there's this like emphasis on like you have to be on camera for it to be legitimized, and that's not true. And there are plenty of people who do a lot of work, particularly in like stats driven data or in written work, that is excellent and that I cite all the
Yeah,
time.
right.
And there are just like, you don't have to force yourself into somebody else's role. You can create your own niche based on your strengths and move that way. So like determine what you're good at, what you enjoy, what resonates, which pieces of that which you do resonate with other people, and then focus on those, because abundance grows where energy flows.
Hey, I like that. Women in this industry, you started out, there weren't women in this industry really, and you're one of the OGs. So that's super awesome that a lot of like, I know it sucks to hear that we're getting old, but we are. But all these like, there are a lot more women in the space now, and a lot of them look up to you as someone for inspiration that, you know, they've
Mhm.
been able to see do this journey. How does it feel seeing more women in this space now?
I think it feels great. I love seeing more women in the space. I am personally tired of the women in the space conversation.
Yeah.
I think I said this on a Clubhouse recently. Like for me personally, I also feel like I don't want to just be an inspiration for women in the space, but for people who are content creators and
Mhm.
original thinkers in the space, because I did build my brand, my platform, my career from nothing, as we discussed, right? Like
Right.
I think I don't I, I don't come from a connected family. I don't come from a wealthy family. I didn't know anybody who worked in fantasy sports or sports period, and just built this on my own. And so I would like to be an inspiration for anyone who is like an independent content creator, growing growing a business, you know. I also don't necessarily love the like as a woman conversation, because I think what happens is that people are like, well, you're like this OG lady fantasy football person, like the first lady of fantasy. When people call me that, I didn't make that up. Like I never went on a podcast being like, you should call me the first lady of fantasy, right? Like that's not who I am. But also, I am not the best female analyst in the space. I am one of the best analysts in the space.
Right.
And I'm not out here trying to be like the best girl. I'm out here legitimately, not even trying, but like legitimately one of the best analysts, period, in the space. And so like that's why I get a little bit frustrated by it, but also recognize that I do have a responsibility, or I feel I have a responsibility as a woman in the space, to hold up and encourage other women. And that is particularly why I have refined the nobody gets your energy but you advice and conversation, because it has helped me tremendously.
And you said earlier that you don't get those comments as much anymore because people know your stuff, people know you've been around and they know your stuff, and that the newer women, some of the newer women, and I see that, and I can see that as maybe scaring off some women who want to be in the industry. I don't like the women in the industry talk at the point where people ask me like, "Oh, I know you get a lot of crap and I know this, that, and the other." And I'm like, "I really don't. I'm not one of those women that you should be talking to about this." Not that I'm like trying to say that I'm above all of that. No, I got it when we first, you know, when I first joined Twitter. I got it when, you know, it just kind of, it sucks to have to say that just comes with the territory, but it freaking feels like it sometimes.
Yeah, I also think that there's like, I don't take the bait anymore. That's what I mean
Yeah,
about protecting my energy, right?
kind of.
Like,
Yep.
I don't try to engage with someone who is not kind. Like, again, I'm out in the world, and I don't, if somebody is like actively mean to me, why am I going to talk to them? Why am I going to give them an ounce of my attention?
That exactly.
It
Be
only,
positive.
I
You
mean,
don't need
it
you don't
only
need
elevates.
negativity.
Yeah. And it also like, what is it like? It only it only draws attention to them. And sometimes, like, listen, I have a folder on my desktop of screenshotted tweets that says, um, it says, it says, Joe doesn't like women, because the first guy who ever did it was just like, he like full on admitted, like, I just don't like women. And so I do have like a folder, and I have screenshotted like the particularly nasty biting ones. And I've thought about
Yeah.
like making a coffee table book out of them at some point in my life, but I don't need to give Joe any shine.
No, hey,
I
yeah.
don't need his reply showing up in somebody else's feed because of some algorithm that I do not understand, and giving him some attention. So I just don't add any fuel to that. I don't take the bait.
Let's talk about something more positive. What is an experience that you've had working in the fantasy football industry that is like something you could have never in a million years imagined would have happened, and then it was able to actually happen?
Oh, I was in I feel like it's gonna be braggy, but you know what? I'm trying to be better about like that being okay.
It is okay.
I was in the Chiefs locker room after they won the Super Bowl at the top of 2020, and that was a pretty incredible
Yeah.
experience. And I got to talk to Tyrann Mathieu about being a girl dad, and I talked to Chris Jones about how his play in the fourth quarter changed the momentum of the game. So I got to talk to some defensive players, which I don't really get to discuss much in fantasy. Right. Obviously talked to Patrick as well. And I think that was like, I'd worked Super Bowls before, but being in the locker room after the Chiefs won the Super Bowl was like one of those electric, like and I remember I was like, I started a blog 10 years ago, and here I am in Miami.
Super, super rad. Super rad.
Yeah.
How did COVID change your day to day when it comes to work, or was it pretty much,
I don't think it changed my day to day a whole bunch. I don't need to go. I do have an office, and I do have a studio, but I don't need to go into the office to write articles. The company created an entire home studio in my house. So cool. I have like a whole setup, and learning the technology and how to make the camera work and the lights and all of that stuff. Like there was a learning curve for sure. But I don't, I also in some ways like I interviewed Eli Manning twice. I interviewed Magic Johnson. Like there were so many more people were available because they were interviewing virtually, via like Zooms or Skype or something. So I got to talk to and interface with so many more athletes than I would have like anyway. Yeah. That in some ways, like it wasn't in person, right? Like I'm not standing there with Magic Johnson, but I got to have like an hour-long conversation with him. And so even though it was virtual, it's still an opportunity that I was able to get that I wouldn't have, I imagine, had the pandemic not, changed how we communicate.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, about the fact that you were able to talk to so many more people that you wouldn't have got the chance to talk to. So that's really cool. So you were talking about being a girl dad when you were talking earlier. What I was going to ask is, with you and being, you have a family, how is balancing work life and family life for you?
I'm trying to get better at it. I am very lucky that I have a job where, aside from the video stuff, like, listen, Fantasy Football Live is a live show. Lights are on, cameras on, 90 minutes before kickoff. You best be ready to go, lady. There's no like pulling in late to that. But I will say that like I have articles due. I have, for the most part, as long as I know it's due, I can work, whenever I need to work. I have worked plenty of like till 2 o'clock in the morning finishing something because a kid had an ear infection or, like family constraints. My husband works full time, like I said. During the pandemic, it was much more difficult because I had a first grader at home and I'm trying to teach him first grade. And my baby was 3 and she did not go to preschool. But luckily my husband's company was also work from home. So we were like trading off, and I am very lucky that I have a partner who is supportive and tries to help as much as he can. And we have a pretty even, like he does a lot of the logistics of the kids and I do a lot of like taking them to the doctor's office and talking to the teachers and a lot of like the emotional, intentional parenting. And he does a lot of like unloading the dishwasher and stuff like that.
There you go.
So I am lucky. And I think also I'm just going to mention this because I was raised by a single mom. I'm very lucky to have a partner, and I understand like my mom became a single mom when I was 13 months old. I understand the plight of single mothers, and I don't think I would be able to pull this off if I didn't have the privilege of having a partner who could, or if I didn't have family nearby. I don't have family nearby, but I think like this would be impossible if it was just me with 2 kids by myself.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like, I don't even have kids, and like it's already crazy. And I work a regular 9 to 5 and then come home and try to do fantasy stuff. But yeah, I can't even imagine having kids to go along with that. What do you guys do in your free time when you guys are, I know I always ask people if they have free time. Let's say you were magically like out given some time.
Oh gosh. Well, I love to travel, which is funny to say, right? Because we haven't gotten to do a lot of that. I love hiking. I love wine tasting.
Yes. Yes.
I do I like drinking a lot. I mean,
Hey,
I do love wine tasting. But I think to me, like just like learning about other people and learning about their stories. I'm that person. I've discovered this about myself in the pandemic. I am not good at small talk. I want to know, like you, right? Like I was like, okay, tell me about your dog. Tell me about your wife. When are you getting married? Okay. I sent you a wedding present.
Yes.
Like if I am invested in someone, I am invested. And it is not the greatest thing, honestly, for someone who's trying to conserve energy. And in the pandemic, I've discovered that I have like my favorite people, and I am so glad that I can see them again more readily. And we had backyard barbecue hangs, but like the people in my life that I like 60%, I don't want to carve out the energy to, like, I need 30 minutes of exposure to that person. Right. So if you're asking me what I like to do in my spare time, it's just like get to know. I want to get down deep. I want to hear about your flaws. I just want to learn about other people and other perspectives because I'm so fascinated by everybody. The storytelling has largely been told from one singular POV, but learning other people's experiences from life just opens up our emotional reservoir and our ability to empathize on different levels. And that fascinates me. Like to hear your story as a queer woman and the way you lived life is in the South is fascinating to me because it's not the experience I've had. Whereas like I've talked to people and they're like, oh, you're like a blonde, blue-eyed Latina who grew up with a single mom in the Midwest. Like that's a perspective that hasn't been told. And, like I'm fascinated to like hear other people's, how the world was, how they received the world and how that impacted their choices and actions. That at the end of the day is the thing that makes me the most excited.
That's one of the big reasons why I decided to do a podcast like this, because I know like Harmon had to, Backyard Banter in the past, and there are some other podcasts that are like that as well. But I want to be able to talk to people and really get to know a lot of these people that you don't even really know that much about. So, I mean, your story I know, but other people don't. So it's really cool to be able to share that story. You're welcome. So my last question before I let you plug all your stuff is, Scott Fishbowl, did you sign up for a specific division, or are there? I'm not gonna. I mean, this could be like just a thumbs up. Yeah, sure, I did.
have a general, so I've been playing the fishbowl since its inception, I think.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, like Scott and I are friendly. We chat about work and kids and family and all this stuff all the time. I would say we are actual friends. We are real life friends. And I have decided that the thing that he has created is so, I've watched it explode and I am so excited for him. And the amount of joy it brings, not just to him, but like the entire community, makes me not want to control it. I kind of just like want to land. I did like request, like, you know, I think we rate like music. It's music, right?
It's music. Yes.
Right. Like he sent me an email and I was like, here are my like favorite singers and stuff like that. And so he'll put me, but like, honestly, I just want, it's so big that like, there's no controlling it. There's nobody that I'm like dying to like compete against. I just kind of like being a part of it. And I love, honestly, this is going to sound, I love the anonymity that I have within it. I love that I can just like play this massive, weird scoring tournament that makes me crazy. And that like, I've said this straight up to Scott, like by week 7, I'm so busy that I'm like, I don't know, I give up. Like whatever.
Hey,
you know, like I don't know, like that's one of my favorite. I've made the playoffs most years, almost every year. I think I've made the playoffs, but like, well, I had Dak last year. God, that's
me too. Me too.
And I'm always super excited for it. But I know that some people are like, well, I want this division. I care way less about winning that tournament than participating in it. To me, that's all about the journey and all about learning. Like I just did an eliminator John Bosch put together, who you just had on the show, right? Yep. He put together an eliminator and I had so much fun in the like DMing with everybody in the group chat. I had so much, like, that's what I mean. Like, I just want to get to know other people. Like, I don't need to sit here and be like, well, Scott Turner's win percentage is he's top 10 in passing over the past. Like, I know all that stuff, so you can read my work if you want to learn more about that. But like, also like one of the guys in my eliminator is like from England. And I was like, tell me your story. Like, how does a Brit get into fantasy football? And, you know, so I view the Scott Fishbowl as like a giant cocktail party, and I'm just happy to mingle.
Oh man, I won your eliminator one year, so that was pretty dope. I really enjoyed that. Hey, I can't win my own, but it was cool to be able to win yours. But yeah, I like those chats too. It really is cool. I think the best part of Scott Fishbowl is like getting to meet these people that I never in a million years would have been able. I'm friends with so many people. Like I just met Gabe Gearing for like the second time just in Austin. He was in my Scott Fishbowl division. That's how I met him. Like, it's just crazy to think that brings everybody together. And I know Scott's like, his mind's blown at how big this has gotten. So super awesome. Well, Liz, I really, really, really am so happy that you could come on and talk with me. I love you so much. You're an awesome person.
Thank you, Casey. That means a lot. No, I mean, and that's, like we became friendly for real. Like that's also, I just want to have all of your listeners know that like, it's okay if you don't vibe with someone, don't try to make something happen that isn't going to happen. Like Casey and I met in person and we connected, and I like connected with her wife and we talked about dogs, and like we didn't, I don't think we talked at all about the business. We just talked about being human, and then and that's kind of how things evolve. So thank you so much. I always appreciate you, love you. And by the way, also I've had her on FFL. I've had her on the podcast because I like her and I respect her. Yes. But it all came from a conversation of just being normal.
Just being normal, or as normal as
as you and I can be.
Yes.
And let's see, that's it. Were you going to ask me what to plug?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to go. Yeah. I almost forgot to. Sorry, I'm having such a good time talking with you. But go ahead and plug your stuff. I know we talked about it, but go ahead just one more time.
Sure. Well, I have some stuff coming up that I'm excited about. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at LizLoza_FF. My last summer, I launched a series called Rest versus Rust, which was really well received. And I was actually really proud to create a new piece of content in a space that, let's be honest, has a lot of recycled concepts in it. So I created Rest versus Rust, and now I'm starting season 2 of Rest versus Rust. And I'm getting help from this doctor who's an orthopedic surgeon and team doctor at USC University of Southern California. And he helped me in last year. So that's going to launch in June. I start interviewing him tomorrow, June 2nd, actually. So keep an eye out for Rest versus Rush. We're starting with Dak. Speaking of Dak, we're going to take a look and see from a medical perspective, does he anticipate Dak to be a little bit rusty? Because obviously that was a pretty gnarly injury, and it's been less than a year, though he is cleared and expected to start. So what do we think from a medical perspective? What can we expect reasonably from him? And then I'll give it a fantasy spin. We're also doing Saquon Barkley, which is another player who I'm not sure about. Saquon, in 2018 and 2019, he averaged over 16 carries per game. I don't think he's going to get that this year. I think volume is going to take a dip. The question is, will he be so efficient given the field stretchers that the team has added that he'll make up for it with some YPC? I don't know, though. I know
that's tricky.
That's he had an ACL tear in week 2 versus the Bears, but there was also MCL damage to that knee. So we're going to talk about him in Rest versus Rust. And I'm getting this orthopedic surgeon's opinion, his professional opinion. So check that out. Also, I will be covering the Olympics for Yahoo Sports, likely doing it domestically. I don't think it's still up in the air, but I'm 90% sure I'm not going to travel to Tokyo. But I'm very excited about, I'm going to cover volleyball, but I'm also going to talk to all of the athletes via Skype and Zoom and do some fun stuff. I've already interviewed a couple of swimmers, and we're banking some content. So if you are looking for a second screen experience, in addition to watching the Olympics live, I will be working from midnight to 7 a.m. Pacific time to cover it because of the time change. So please check that out on Yahoo Sports. And then also just go to Yahoo Fantasy. We have the Yahoo Fantasy Football podcast. And I'm really proud of the people I get to work with and the work that we consistently churn out, and the fact that it is all self-created because we do write and research our own self.
Super awesome. I appreciate you coming on again. I'm going to say it one more time. And everybody out there, go ahead and follow Liz, check out all of her work, and make sure to tune in next week for another awesome time. Later.